Fabulous. Good morning, everybody. Please do take a moment to get comfortable and we will get started in 1 minute's time. We'll just allow a couple more people to join. I can see a few more trickling on in. So do grab a quick drink and get comfortable and we'll get started in 1 moment. Lovely. A few more people just coming on in, so I'll let them settle and then we'll get started. Fab, let's get going though. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's really important discussion, women's reproductive health in the workplace, and we're going to be discussing those impacts and challenges. I'm Steph Pryor, I'm the clinical services lead here at Juniper, and I'm also a fertility midwife. And it's a real honour to be joined by such an expert panel today in this important discussion. Let's get our slides working. So as I said, thank you to our lovely panel for joining us today. So we've got Jessica and Bradley from JourneyHR and Laura, who is the founder of Leading. So I guess we'll start with Jessica and Bradley. Do you want to just introduce yourselves and let everybody know who you are and what you do?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Jessica Anderson-Ramshall. I'm a HR director at JourneyHR. I've a little over 20 years experience now working predominantly in the creative media and advertising space.
Brilliant. Hi, my name is Bradley Geimer. I'm a colleague of Jess, also at JourneyHR. I'm a HR consultant. I have a background in financial services and also, media and creative. Nice to be here this morning.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura. So I am the founder of Leading, but I'm an ex-head of people at two rapidly scaling tech startups. So now I run my own business, which is all about working with founders and managers in those small early stage kind of crazy scaling businesses to embed and hardwire leadership skills and EQ skills and all the communication skills into their business. But I guess I do it via micro learning rather than the big long workshops. So yeah, that's me. It's lovely to be here. Nice to meet everyone.
No, amazing to have you all with us today, and thank you so much for those amazing introductions. So let's have a little look at what we'll be covering. So we're going to be exploring kind of what actually is reproductive health, and then we'll look at kind of real world impact and challenges that people face in the workplace. And then from there we'll unpack kind of workplace support, and then we can finish up with a Q&A. Just to let you know, this session is recorded. You can ask questions through the Q&A box at any point, and there is an option there to submit them anonymously if you so wish. So yeah, we're going to keep this very much a conversation, and please feel free to join in, share scenarios or anything that you feel will be relevant for today's conversation. So I think it's really important before we start to kind of maybe have a little think. You can write in the Q&A box your thoughts, but have you ever personally experienced a reproductive health challenge, or maybe do you know a friend or a colleague or maybe a family member that has? And some of you might be thinking, no, actually, I haven't, but I'd like to kind of really challenge that perspective today. So maybe if you could just take a moment, have a little think, and yeah, let me know your thoughts. And you can see here, when we think about reproductive health, it's not just fertility and having a baby, which I think a lot of people presume that kind of this falls into. So we're not just thinking about kind of trying and struggling to get pregnant. It's much broader than that. And you can see these are just a few examples of kind of reproductive health conditions. So we're talking about kind of endometriosis, PCOS, heavy menstrual bleeding, pregnancy loss, IVF, perimenopause, menopause. So it spans your whole lifetime. And I think even if you personally haven't faced these challenges, the chances are that kind of someone on your team has, or someone you work with or manage or lead. And these aren't personal issues. I think it's really important to highlight early on they impact productivity, retention, mental health, and they're often hidden because of this stigma and fear that we have. And you can see from the stats there, and I won't read all of them out to you, but infertility affects 1 in 6 couples worldwide. So this statistic alone tells us that reproductive health issues aren't rare. These challenges are far more common than kind of people realize. And as I said, the stats will talk for themselves, but however kind of widespread these issues are, many people still face them silently. So I'm really honoured to be having this proactive conversation today with you all, and especially talking about that support and flexibility within the workplace. And I think it's really easy to see that maybe these challenges, when we talk about fertility or reproductive health, that people see them as something private that stays kind of outside the workplaces. But the reality is, they don't stop at the office door. That heavy menstrual bleeding follows you to the desk. That pregnancy loss is at the back of your mind all the time. And I think it's just really important to really highlight that. But Jessica, when we look at kind of some of the most common challenges that employees share when it comes to kind of fertility and reproductive health, what are you seeing? What are the conversations that you're having?
There are a few challenges which I see more frequently than others. The first one, which I see all the time, is that there can be this feeling that there's a workplace stigma and a lack of support attached to fertility in the workplace, which means some employees can feel uncomfortable discussing their fertility issues or treatments with their employer due to that kind of fear of discrimination or being perceived as less committed. And that's often coupled with a lack of formal workplace policies that support things like adequate time off for fertility treatments or recovery. So people don't even know how to begin the conversation with their employer. I think the second thing is that emotional and mental strain. So fertility challenges can be really emotionally taxing. They often involve those cycles of hope and disappointment. And that emotional burden can really affect people's performance. It can affect their focus and their overall well-being. And then finally, there's a real lack of access to affordable and comprehensive fertility care in the workplace. Some employers are catching on. So Google famously covers up to 4 rounds of IVF and elective egg freezing for their employees. Ticketmaster contributes £19,000 over an employee's lifetime for fertility treatment. So companies are catching up, but there really is still a long way to go.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. There is a lot more that we can be doing, and especially a lot more that doesn't cost a lot as well. And we know that kind of mental health and stress of fertility reproductive treatments can lead to kind of chronic stress or burnout. Bradley, have you seen a link between the lack of support and kind of employee burnout?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think there's a link. So of course, individuals may already be facing emotional and psychological stress from their own challenges with fertility, be it IVF treatment or chronic conditions like endometriosis. Fertility treatment often also require medical appointments and time off, which can be difficult for employees to manage if their employers do not offer flexible work options. This lack of flexibility can contribute to stress and burnout as well. And as we also know, fertility treatments can also be quite expensive. Companies that do not necessarily offer financial support or health benefits related to fertility treatments may inadvertently place additional financial burden on employees, again, which can be extremely stressful. When organisations fail to support employees' personal challenges, it can also lead to feelings of feeling undervalued And this perception can, of course, contribute to low morale and increased turnover. And I think just getting the basics right can have such an impact. Ensuring you have policies which are easily accessible means that individuals can avoid having those perhaps daunting conversations before they're really ready to do so.
Absolutely, and we'll go on to discuss kind of policies and what we can do in the workplace a little bit more. But Laura, how open are you finding that employers are being about kind of talking about those experience? Bradley mentioned about finding HR policies, and often that can be a real barrier to kind of starting those conversations because people don't know where they stand in the first place. What's your experience? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because I think it's easy to potentially assume that an open culture is a bit more likely in a smaller business, which is, my experiences from much smaller kind of startups. And yes, I guess in some ways it is, but I've experienced life in like a huge global enterprise and a really small early startup. And I think that it's still quite rare for people to be very much like crack your heart wide open, honest about things that are so deeply personal and vulnerable. And especially when we feel like it might have career implications. So with all the psychological safety in the world, I think there are some parts of our lives that maybe we just won't want to share. And I don't think that you could confidently say that if people aren't being open about these things with HR, that you don't have a good or solid culture. So I think with that in mind, as people, I think our job is fundamentally to understand that and therefore kind of do our best to build workplaces that with the bones of the business are really structured in a way that's inclusive and has that kind of inbuilt safety net, right? The things like where we have leaders who are entrusted to lead by example. But when I say that, I don't mean we ask our leaders to be more vulnerable than they wish to be, but we just set clear expectations that part of their job is to communicate that these policies exist and that they're important and that you are able to use them and there will be no repercussions for using them, and being really clear with the policies that we have and support channels we have so they don't require that public disclosure to access them. And I think that it's not really about getting everybody to share everything all the time. It's about building a system where if somebody doesn't say something, they still feel like they're seen and supported.
Absolutely, hit the nail on the head there. It is feeling seen, heard, and that accessibility to information that is so important and ultimately doesn't cost anything, but I probably think has one of the biggest impacts on an employee. And as we move on to the kind of next slide and understand the significance of reproductive health, we know it's not a luxury. 58% of people going through fertility treatment, do worry it will negatively affect their career. That's over half, of people going through treatment. That's a real worry. And 36% of them say it's already damaged their career. And 15% say they've had to reduce their hours or leave their job entirely. And that's a real sad statistic. We're talking about real people, smart, skilled professionals having to choose between their future or their reproductive health and their current career. And I think that's really sad. And these statistics are measurable. They're backed by the data. You can see that 72% of employees are more likely to stay in companies offering fertility benefits. That means that 72% of your workforce could be looking for a new job because they provide a better benefit elsewhere. 61% say they feel more committed, engaged with a company that provides support, and 57% say they would leave for a better job. So we talked about that accessibility. It's not just this well-being issue, it is a retention strategy ultimately, and it's a real leadership opportunity and a chance to build a workplace where people can really thrive. And I think, Laura, you said about you don't have to know every detail, but you just need to make it accessible for people. I guess, could you share a scenario where maybe a small policy change could lead to a big improvement in retention or engagement or even accessibility, as you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. So at a previous organisation that I worked at, we had, the standard family leave policy, the one that you copy paste from ACAS, and kind of the statutory mat leave and pat leave. And it was very basic because it worked because we were so small, right? And it was very much a we'll cross that bridge when we come to it kind of thing. But as we started scaling, it became really clear that we need something a little bit stronger than this, right? Not just the legal minimum, but I guess a policy that actually we were doing a lot of work on culture and what we stood for as a business. And so we felt like we needed a policy that reflected that. And so we updated it. And I didn't just tweak the basics. Like I was really keen to add I just added a few small sentences in the policy, but time off for baby loss, right? And at any stage, and making that part really clear as well at any stage. And paid time off for fertility investigations or reproductive health investigations, and perhaps naively, I really didn't expect the reaction that we got. I think we already had a culture of what I felt was really autonomous and had loads of ownership. And so I guess I assumed that if people needed it, they could have just asked and they thought they would have known we would have said yes. But it goes back to saying what I said earlier about people not feeling comfortable to share everything is the reaction was immediate, right? People really noticed it. And I had team members reaching out to me saying how much it meant to just see those couple of lines in there. And our NPS score, like it significantly went up that quarter. And we had a lot of specific comments to say that they felt that they could stay longer with us. And one of the team members told me, said, I'm going to stay longer with you guys because I see this in my future. I think this is going to be something I'm going to be tackling. And so I'm staying now because I know that I'm going to be supported. And in a small business, that retention is so valuable. I mean, I could go on about the financial implication of the thousands of pounds of knowledge lost and stuff if people leave, but realistically, like retaining just that one person, even that small impact was massive for us. And yeah, I think it really didn't have the result that I expected, but I was perhaps a bit naive about it, but it was a massive change. And it was just a couple of sentences that we added that made it clear how we felt about these things.
Yeah, I think that scenario is incredible. And even the pregnancy loss at any stage, those 3 words are so important. Pregnancy loss doesn't end just in those few months when you're in that recovery. You may find in 9 months that due date that is a trigger, and at any stage being able to say, do you know what, I just need a couple of days, or I need a week, or however long you need just to be with myself and process that, it is so important. And yeah, I think amazing examples that you've used there. And Jessica, what has kind of JourneyHR used as the business case when kind of implementing fertility and reproductive health benefits?
Thanks. I mean, these stats, they speak for themselves, right? I'd say the primary business case has to be to attract and retain that top talent. Businesses want to stand out in a competitive job market. This absolutely appeals to the upcoming people, so that those millennial and Gen Z values, this massively appeals to them as well. And it increases employee loyalty. I'd say the second thing would be to boost engagement and productivity. So if you can reduce the stress and that mental health strain on people going through fertility challenges, it will lower absenteeism in the long run. It will improve morale and focus. And finally, it's promoting that inclusion and equity piece. I think a lot of companies want to be inclusive, they want to be equitable, but perhaps they don't know where to start. So implementing better fertility benefits, implementing policies, talking about it internally, getting the right level of support there can go a really long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important that when we kind of look at these policies as well, that we're including partners, whether male or female, allowing time off for fertility treatment shouldn't just include that partner who's having that physical scan. It should include the partner who is also on that journey with them. As a fertility nurse, and I've been a fertility nurse for over 10 years now, it's not always good news at those scans. And there's nothing worse than delivering bad news to somebody that is by themselves. It's difficult to digest. It's a lot of information, and you're experiencing a loss and a grief during that time. So yeah, definitely kind of thinking outside the box, being inclusive to partners as well, I feel is kind of so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when we go on to kind of look at that kind of workplace support, you can see that only 19% of managers said their organisation had a formal policy in place for fertility treatment. And so that is really, really low. And I think support doesn't need to be complicated. You know, those few words spoke for themselves. It just needs to be intentional. And at its core, you know, supporting employees through kind of fertility or reproductive health challenges means creating, you know, those systems that Laura, that you said, make people see safe and seen and supported without having to think twice. And most of it comes down to accessibility. Quite often policies are hidden away and not able to be able to be found. So Bradley, where do you think is a good starting point for companies that are just beginning to kind of explore that reproductive health policy startup, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd encourage companies that are looking to do more in this space or something in this space. I think firstly to lean into their networks. You know, most people who are passionate about this topic within our industries or within HR are usually more than happy to share policies, approaches. I think we also touched on it earlier. Talk to your employees. You know, conduct surveys, engagement surveys, focus groups, just to understand, you know, the needs and perspectives of your employees, you know, regarding reproductive health. This direct input can highlight specific areas of concern or interest. And I think that final piece is research, right? Engaging externally with providers, which may offer basic templates to cover the minimum or statutory entitlements if applicable. But then organizations can potentially enhance those basic policies by implementing paid leave, for example, with guidance from HR, or potentially engaging with benefit providers like Juniper, right, for more comprehensive support and expert advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're more than happy to share our policies. And I think it was included that we would share those HR policies after today's session, which is great, along with the recording, so people will be able to watch it back. But Jessica, what does JourneyHR implement to create this inclusive, tangible support, and kind of what low cost options could you maybe recommend for those that don't have the bigger budgets to kind of implement reproductive health benefits? What would you suggest is a good starting point for them?
Well, I mean, we've partnered with Juniper, and a lot of our clients are looking at this as an affordable option, because it really is. We've looked at lots of different providers to kind of start their journey. I think working with a company like Juniper is really important to ensure that our clients and their employees are getting the right level of advice and support. In addition, we work with our clients to implement those progressive policies. Like you said in one of your early slides, it's not just female reproductive health, it's everything from menopause through to baby loss. There's lots of different things that encompasses that. And that's a really important step, is get a few policies in place. It's the best place to start. I'd also encourage my clients to listen to their people, to really understand what their employees need. The requirements are so individual. It's not a one shoe fits all scenario. So diversifying your support in the right way is really important to ensure there is enough place to support a variety of different challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see we've just got some words on the screen that show kind of what reproductive support looks like here, and one of them is employee resource groups. And Laura, do you could you explain what the role of an employee resource group and how kind of creating that peer network helps in kind of, I guess, boosting reproductive health culture, really?
Yeah, definitely. I think it expands a bit from my point before, where I talked about how, like, we're building the bones of a business and that kind of safety net where it gives people options. You know, solid policies and those quiet systems are great, and it makes you feel supported if you're not ready to talk about it. But an ERG or a peer support network, it helps normalize the conversation if you are wanting to talk about it and if you are wanting to reach out. You know, those networks, especially in kind of larger organizations, they do what policies alone can't. You know, they make the invisible way more visible. And so because they're peer-to-peer as well, it's not like you have to walk into your manager's office and lay everything out. You know, you're connecting with people who already know and understand and empathize with what you're going through or what you're about to go through as well, and without you needing to give all of the explanation that can be quite taxing mentally. And I think the byproduct of that as well is having ERGs and having peer-to-peer networks. It just means that people who even don't even need to join them still feel the impact purely because they exist, right? It's a real knowledge that they exist. It means that the business, they know that the business has created a space for them to exist, and thereby it kind of solidifies that safety net. You know, it's a real moment for a business to say, like, we recognize these things happen and you may not want to talk to us about it, but we have an infrastructure in place that means that you can get support if you choose to have it. So I think they're really critical when, you know, building this kind of culture of talking about things if you feel like you want to, you know.
Absolutely. It's that ripple effect, isn't it? And we often see it, you know, with people coming through for consultations and support or seeking testing and diagnostics, you know, through Juniper. We'll see somebody has an appointment and then we may see a flurry of more because they've been back and they've discussed it in their employee resource group. But you see somebody a year later and they said, oh, my friend had it a year ago, so I knew about it. It's that ripple effect that kind of transpires through the company. So those smaller conversations actually have such a big impact. And I think we kind of discussed the impact of providing reproductive health support and benefits, you know, and I think Jessica, you discussed it beautifully earlier as well. But do you think the rise of kind of remote and hybrid work has accelerated employees' expectations around personal well-being, including reproductive health? For me, I could 100% say yes. So what are you seeing from what's coming through your end?
So it absolutely has. There's a massive emphasis now on wellness that we've never seen before. Employees expect support beyond that basic healthcare, and reproductive health is now part of overall well-being. It's much more part of the conversation these days. I think since kind of COVID, employees feel more empowered than ever before. There's bags and bags of statistics out there confirming that well-being is a top priority when choosing a new role, and that is for all generations. There are now 5 generations in our workforce, and well-being is a top priority for all of those generations. So that is a shift that I've certainly not seen in my career. And there's now a normalisation of sensitive topics. You know, people are talking about this more. It's easier to talk about fertility and loss. The stigma's starting to reduce. So there's much more pressure now on employers to respond with real support than ever before.
Absolutely. Really seeing that shift in reproductive health conversations. You know, we've got the men's health strategy going through the government as well, and it's great to have a male representative here with us today, Bradley. But what shifts are you seeing in candidates that are kind of prioritising maybe reproductive health in their contract negotiations? Jessica, you mentioned we've got 5 generations now within the workforce, but are people thinking about negotiating reproductive health into their contracts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think prospective candidates definitely want to see their potential organisation stance through their policies on these type of subjects before signing on the dotted line. I think we're definitely seeing more individuals during the recruitment stages as well, asking what organisations are offering in this space, whether it's just the bare minimum, the statutory offered, obviously where this exists, versus whether or not an organisation is going above and beyond with paid leave, flexibility, etc. So I definitely think there is a shift towards, similar to what we've been saying, right? There's definitely a shift in people getting a lot more comfortable talking about these subjects and being really open from the outset of their expectations, definitely.
Absolutely. And Laura, I know you touched on it earlier, but just revisiting, you can see that we've got that stat there that it talks about 61% of improvement in team morale with those that receive fertility benefits. And have you seen that firsthand? You obviously mentioned about the changes in the policy, but are you finding people are wanting to return to work quicker after treatment because that policy and support is there? What kind of examples are you seeing in the workforce?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I've seen firsthand like how much of a difference this can make, because so in terms of team cohesion, right? In terms of that, I think the most tangible thing that we saw was a reduction in the amount of requests for last minute leave. So because managers had a really clear process to follow and everyone knew what they were entitled to, and they could approach using this benefit in a way that was much more structured, so they could plan things in advance, and they knew that they could book it off as paid leave. So rather than the last minute, oh, I have an appointment today, I might need to take some time off, it was very much a like, and that then has a ripple effect with the team, because everyone starts scrambling and trying to figure out how to kind of allocate work. So in small teams, regardless of the size of an organization, like, it has a huge effect on the pace and targets, client SLAs, all of that is much easier because it's easier to plan, and there's no need to explain why somebody's off. It's just knowing that they're off in advance. It just takes away a lot of frustration as well. So I guess on a very practical sense, we definitely saw that. And I think on the morale side of things, when you offer benefits like this, it's way more than just ticking a box, right? It's kind of sending a clear message to say, we've thought about what you might need without you having to ask us for it. It's like kind of intentional thinking, and that has a huge impact on morale. I think the reality is as well, it's like managers come and go and cultures evolve. And if your support system is reliant on individual personalities, then it's a very, very fragile support system. So when you build a really structured, really solid, like, bones of a company, and regardless of how empathetic a manager may or may not be, like, people feel safer and they feel more able to kind of take the benefits that they have. And I think when they feel safer, they show up better for themselves, for your customers, for the clients that you have and your team. So I think all in all, it just makes such a massive difference.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's just acknowledging that actually your team knows that you're busy. They know that actually it does feel like an inconvenience taking time off for all of us, whether we're booking holiday or a medical appointment. We know it's inconvenient. We're managing our workloads ourselves. We know it. But I think when you're well supported, you want to return, you want to get back quicker, and you want to help the team out that's been supporting you in that interim. So I couldn't agree more. And I guess we've got some, we're running out of time, but kind of got some tips for being mindful as a manager here, some do's and don'ts. I won't read them out one by one, but for us, it's kind of focusing on listening and understanding, create that supportive framework and being an advocate, even if it's recognizing baby loss awareness week or infertility week, just a little awareness goes such a long way. And just how do you go about kind of training managers maybe to have those sensitive and kind of conversations? And it's not about taking on somebody's personal life, but how do you go about kind of not teaching but kind of advising around that?
It's a tough one, isn't it? And I think managers have a certain amount of nervousness around this. My top 3 tips that I always give managers are, first of all, let the employee lead the conversation. Don't initiate personal questions. Try and create a space where people feel safe to share. So offering support, not curiosity. I'd say the second thing would be to use inclusive, neutral language. Avoid assumptions about things like gender or relationship status. Reflecting and using the terminology that the employee is using can go a long way, makes people feel comfortable. And finally, focus on support, not circumstances. So if you ask the employee what they need right now, might be a bit of time off, might be a bit of flexibility, but then revisit that with the employee as often as that employee needs, so they get that continual support throughout the entire process.
Absolutely. And Bradley, how do you think leaders or managers can build this culture without employees having that fear of kind of, I guess, not feeling safe or a fear of stigma?
Yeah, certainly. So I think to break down the stigma attached to these topics, we of course need to be creating a supportive environment and culture by ensuring that we've got psychological safety in our organizations, right? This means creating space for the conversation, like we were just talking about, upskilling line managers to be able to handle these sensitive topics and conversations, ensuring we have ERGs and policies in place, because that ultimately sends a signal that the organisation recognises and cares about these issues. And I think all of these pieces will continue breaking down the taboo nature of these topics just by talking about it like we're doing here today, right? Sort of creating that awareness again. I think also leveraging your senior leadership to engage with these topics where they feel comfortable to do so, of course, through sharing their own personal experiences or stories, at, company one-to-one fireside chats, those sort of things as well. Ultimately leading by example. And, we know that culture is kind of fostered and starts at the top. I think also recognizing awareness days, like we said before, leveraging the ERGs and ED&I groups to start or continue shining a light on these topics. Again, it's that talking about the topics, I think, which really breaks down the taboo nature. And just ensuring that there are support networks, right, where employees can discuss their experiences and challenges openly. And of course, leaning on our EAP and potentially counselling benefits that we may have in place as well to support individuals going through these challenges.
Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned about kind of change often comes from the top, but I don't think we should underestimate the impact you can have as a colleague, as a friend. And I guess we've put here kind of how a couple of scenarios on how you can show empathy to a colleague and make them feel seen and valued. And I guess the biggest thing that we can do is kind of listen and take lead from those that are having the conversation. Don't pry, let somebody be open as much as they are willing to. But I guess we are running out of time, and I'd love to kind of finish off and ask you all a question on kind of what's the one piece of kind of practical advice that you'd offer someone wanting to show empathy towards a colleague. Jessica, should we start with you?
Sure. For me, it would be not making assumptions about someone's individual journey, about their relationship status, about what they're going through. I've supported a lot of different types of people through all kinds of fertility challenges, from single mothers going through an insemination process through to couples working with a surrogate or going through IVF. And I can tell you every scenario is different. It's really emotional. It can be quite tough. So not making assumptions and treating each case individually is key.
Absolutely. Bradley, do you want to go next?
I feel like Jess just had a little bit of mine there. I think it's leveraging the full network, right? It is, we are dealing with some real, heavy topics. So, we all get burnt out a little bit. So, making sure that individual going through that has, several support channels, whether it's ERGs, their line manager, HR, and colleagues as well. I think that's that kind of overall support network that we need to look at and be aware of as well.
Absolutely. Laura, we'll head to you, and then we've got a couple of questions, so we'll make our way through them as well.
Yeah, of course. So for me, I think it's, especially when it comes to leadership, give people a mentally light escape route. And I think by that I mean, for example, so in a small business, you could say, like, if things are getting heavy, just send me a heart emoji on Slack and I will know. You don't need to do anything else. Go and take a moment. Like, just give them a very mentally light escape route. That doesn't mean they have to then send a big long email to say, I'm not feeling so great, because I think sometimes things happen that can really trigger you, especially in a small business. If you're in a all hands and someone announces a pregnancy that you weren't expecting, it can be quite triggering. And so having that out and that ability to just go, I'm just going to send this thing and I'm going to go take some time, it just takes that pressure off. So I think that's a really important thing, to give it a mentally light escape route.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, and some really great tips there. I'll have a little look through other questions. So let me see. So the first one that we've got is, how do you perceive the current awareness and literacy in terms of reproductive, menstrual, menopausal health at individual and organisational levels? So I don't know who fancies taking this one. Jessica, do you fancy taking this one?
Sure. I think that there is a bit of a disconnect, isn't there, between how employees perceive it versus how the company perceives it. I think companies have a lot of great intentions and they're starting to put policies and procedures and support mechanisms in place. But quite often they don't talk about it internally, they don't publicise it internally. And that's where this disconnect can happen, where you might have lots of stuff in place, but if you're not telling your employees about it, they're not going to know. So their perception of the support is often lower than it should be. So talking about what you have in place at company meetings, from HR bulletins, however you kind of formally communicate with your employees is a great place to start to reduce some of that negative perception.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we're so proud to support through Juniper as well with policies and, you know, not just reproductive health, but we've got women's health policies that we're able to support with as well, because often companies are scared about what language they should use. How should they talk about it? We're not expecting companies or a HR manager to have all the answers, to know what endometriosis is. What we want to be able to see is that actually we've got a policy in place, we've done our research, and this is what we can provide you. We're not expecting you to have the answers. Another great question come through, and thank you very much for this, is what's your experience in perspective even, sorry, on the provision of paid leave for menstrual health, particularly how does it affect that stigma? Laura, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess coming from my experience in a much smaller kind of startup environment, I think the stigma is perhaps less because it's more easy to implement these kind of things. So I think you're a bit more agile as an organization. And so these things you can react quite quickly to. But I guess kind of on a larger scale, you know, in a more enterprise organization, I think having the backup of things like Juniper is really valuable because it takes away the tax of implementing these policies because you already have the information to you. And I think that kind of affects the stigma in a way, and there are companies out there that exist to enable these things, and that in and of itself kind of it helps to kind of reduce that stigma, to say there are businesses born to help people with these things. So I think I would say that definitely in a large scale organization, like so using something like Juniper kind of takes away the tax and the operational tax of doing it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of from my experience and having a policy where you have, you know, time off for menstrual health issues, whether that be heavy menstrual bleeding, adenomyosis, endometriosis, you know, again, people feel supported, so they want to return to the workplace quicker. You know, they want to get back to work because they feel supported, and ultimately they're likely to take less time off because of that support that they have in place. Bradley, do you have anything to add to the questions that have been asked? The only other question we have at the moment is, will the deck be shared? And absolutely, we will share the presentation along with those reproductive policies that we promised as well.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's too much to add on top of those two questions. No, definitely. I think those were great, really comprehensive.
Amazing. Well, we haven't got any more questions through, but I'd personally like to thank the panel for joining us today. A really, really interesting conversation. And thank you to those that have joined us. I will give you a couple of minutes back, which is amazing of your day. As we said, we will get the recording and the policies out to you very shortly. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop us an email as well. But thank you again for everybody for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.